Hello everybody and welcome to the Tuesday edition of Video Clips. And as usual, I'm going to start with our most important announcement, which is our conference is getting closer every week, November 9 through 11 here in Columbus, Ohio, with amazing speakers, one of whom I have with me today. You're going to get to hear from Dr. Peter Breggin in a minute. But we have so many fun things planned. We have fabulous speakers talking about all kinds of interesting things. Dr. Anthony Lim is staying a little longer than he planned to originally. He's going to deliver a lecture on Sunday afternoon that is included in your conference ticket on the blue zones. It's more than just diet alone. That's the title of his lecture. And we have Cheryl Atkinson, who is an investigative reporter. She's going to talk about what her investigations have shown about all kinds of things, ranging from the Zika virus to vaccines and many topics I think you'll want to know about. She's going to do a lengthy interview and question and answer session on Saturday night along with dinner. And last but not least, this is the only conference you're going to attend this year where you're going to get a certificate that is good for more money toward educational programs if you decide to take them than the ticket price that you purchased to come to the conference. I hope you got that. You get more money back than you spend. Where else are you going to go and have a weekend like that? So anyway, if you're interested, you can go to wellnessforumhealth.com and you'll see under what's new, there's a conference flyer and you can look at all the exciting things that we're going to be talking about. And the meals are fabulous, the people are fabulous. I love our conference weekends. I look forward to them every single year. And they're a lot of hard work for us, so if we can say we love it, I know you are going to really, really love it. So I am so lucky today, and you are so lucky also, because we have Dr. Peter Breggin with us. He is one of our business partners from Ithaca, New York. And we're going to, both video clips this week will involve interviewing Dr. Breggin about a couple of topics that I think you're going to find really interesting. But in case you're not familiar with Dr. Breggin, he is a psychiatrist from Ithaca who has been in practice for over 50 years and has never placed an individual on a psychiatric drug. And he has very bravely, one of the very few people who began stepping out outside of the traditional psychiatric profession years and years ago and talking about the inadvisability of these drugs, the terrible effects that they have on people, and how important it is, if you can, to withdraw from the drugs. And in fact, that's why he's visiting in Columbus today, because we are, and this whole weekend, because we are filming some exceptional videos that are part of our upcoming courses. So welcome, Dr. Breggin. I'm so glad you're here. And every time I do an interview with you and we put you on video clips and put it out on our YouTube channel, we get so many responses back. I know people love you and would, I wish you lived here, that we would do this all the time. We would do much more of it. So the topic that I chose for today is marijuana. And I'll tell you what inspired me to do this. 28 states plus the District of Columbia have some form of legalization of marijuana. And I think it's a fair guess they're all going to legalize it. And in some respects, this may be a good idea, bad idea. I guess it depends upon the context. But you know so much about psychoactive drugs and the effect on the brain. I'm interested in your perspective on this. So the first thing is people think, and I hear them say this to me sometimes, it's a harmless drug. Well, I don't know that harmless and drug maybe shouldn't be in the same sentence, but what do you think about that?
Well, I see a lot of students on marijuana, and they're vital. Students are active and they're functioning on a high level at Cornell, and because I'm in Ithaca, far above Cayuga's waters. And the first thing I tell them on day one is if you're on a psychoactive drug, and we discuss it, it's usually marijuana, maybe alcohol on the weekends. I will tell them that you won't benefit as much from talking with me if you're on marijuana. It just won't happen that way, because you won't have your feelings available. You won't know exactly what you're feeling. The drug lasts for days and days in the system, and so even if you're just smoking on the weekends, when you see me, you're going to be under the influence of marijuana. And if we want to know who you really are, what you really want out of your life, what are your aspirations, it's not going to happen as well on marijuana. And tell them also, you may not notice it yet, but when you come off the marijuana, you can just discover actually your thinking has been slowed down. You're going to find your short-term memory is just getting better. You're remembering things more easily. And just about all the young people I see stop smoking marijuana.
Mhm.
And most of them do it cold turkey. The drug stays in the system if you're smoking it, for a week or more. And they seem to manage pretty well on that, although I would just offhand say you can go ahead and do that. You need to think about how long you've been on and what's happened when you haven't smoked it for a while. And they always get brighter looking.
Mhm.
They have more feeling, they're more present, and they tell me they didn't realize how much they were being muted by the drug.
Mhm.
Used to talk about deadheads in the 60s being on these drugs. They just changed people, it makes them less motivated, less engaged. And much of the secret to life, as I keep repeating to everybody I meet nowadays, is engagement with other people. Do you have good, active, loving, caring engagements with other people? On marijuana, I don't think that's fully possible. So just looking at what's important in life, which is that fine-tuned edge of emotional awareness, caring, and engagement, it's not going to happen on marijuana. And if you've ever been to a party where you're not smoking dope, or nowadays, eating dope, if you're not doing that, you're watching an alien world. You're watching people giggle over nothing. You're watching people talk about how fabulous the cookies are when they're not all that fabulous at all. You're watching somebody say something really important, which is stupid. Marijuana impairs judgment.
Mhm.
And it especially impairs judgment in that finer aspect of ourselves, which is how we relate, what are our most, sharp and acute and thoughtful and wise thoughts. Over the years, marijuana will do what all psychoactive drugs tend to do. It will more and more create an apathy in the person. The brain wears out after constant exposure to drugs. That's not like a scientific statement, it's like a metaphor for just the brain not functioning the way it should because it's been doused in a neurotoxin, something that's bad for the brain over years. And if you meet people who've been smoking for a long time, they're just not going to probably be who they might have been in terms of their energy level, their vitality, their motivation, their sharpness. And I remember sitting with a friend of mine who was in his 50s and I was in my 50s, and he was talking about how, boy, you get in your 50s and your memory doesn't work as well as it used to, and so on. And I'm sitting there looking at him thinking, gee, I feel sharper than ever.
And you are?
I'm now 82.
82.
And I just didn't have the heart to tell him. It's all those street drugs. But that brings us into another whole area, which is everybody who smokes marijuana just about tries other drugs. It's not like cigarettes. I mean, if you just chat with people who've been smoking cigarettes and you ask them if they've done marijuana or acid or mushrooms or whatever else, or talking about the older days now, they're likely to say, well, maybe, maybe not. But you talk to somebody who's been smoking marijuana, and they have tried other drugs because they get a psychoactive effect that they want to try to enhance. And that gives them an idea, well, maybe there's other psychoactive effects. So it's definitely a gateway drug, and one should be concerned if one's child or one's family member is smoking marijuana because it does lead to other drugs. Then there's another side of it that has been reported in the psychiatric literature, and I've seen it at least a few times in my practice over the years. People become psychotic on marijuana. It has something else been in it. Was it laced with something? It's hard to tell, but it seems clear that smoking what's available as dope often produces a kind of psychedelic trip in the beginning, hallucinations, delusions, very common paranoia on smoking marijuana. And many clinicians now have seen patients who have developed what is almost indistinguishable from schizophrenia in terms of, to the extent that you can even say schizophrenia is an element, is a particular clinical syndrome. So I get more specific. You see young people who are very paranoid and who have voices, not necessarily seeing things, but certainly hearing voices, and who feel persecuted, and who feel untrusting, and who don't recover. And we don't have enough of studies to say, well, that never would have happened, or whatever, but it's clearly something I've seen. The other thing I've seen is when I'm trying to take people off psychiatric drugs, which is something I do daily, taking people off psychiatric drugs, and what a change you get then. I mean, it's even more dramatic generally than coming off marijuana, to be frankly. It's more dramatic even. More dramatic even than coming off alcohol, because the psychiatric drugs are so invasive of the brain. One of the things that you see, can we take a break? Okay. I take many people off psychiatric drugs. It's one of the things that I specialize in. And one of the things I notice is that if they are smoking marijuana,
Along with the drugs.
along with the drugs, during withdrawal from the drugs, they tend to relapse into the psychiatric drugs again, because they're taking something that marijuana that doesn't enable them to be as motivated, doesn't enable them to say, I don't want to be impairing my brain. It's a drug that just takes the edge off who you are as a self-governing human being. And then you have cultures that commonly smoke marijuana and do other drugs, and they are, like, for example, musicians and artists, and the culture becomes one of not being as self-engaged, becomes one of not being so responsible, becomes one of not being so clear about what you think and feel. So I think that the marijuana, if we allow people to grow up smoking it, God knows what the results are going to be, or eating it or imbibing it anyway. And over a lifetime, we're going to be pushing our culture in a direction which is already going, which may be one of the reasons that it's being promoted. Because there are many people now who seem to be wanting our culture not to have clear values, not to have a real sense of personal responsibility, not to have a real sense of their own personal desires and initiative. There's some sort of a desire for a lack of distinctions in our thinking. I don't know if that makes sense to you, Pam?
It does. And you know, what occurs to me as you're saying this is that I know a lot of people who smoked marijuana, and I think that the reason they start is it takes the edge off of the day or the event or the, you know, so you have a rough day, and our culture, and I think it still is this way, you know, let's go home and have a glass of wine or smoke a joint, right? So you're trying to take the edge off the day. But what people don't realize is if they keep doing this, they take the edge off of themselves. And you don't want the edge off of yourself. You don't want to. You just want to escape for tonight. You don't really think to the idea, or think forward to the idea that you could be escaping from your life. And something that you said that I thought was really important is that this stuff stays in your system for a week. So if you're a weekend user,
actively in your system.
Yeah.
For
So
10 days.
if you're a weekend user, you don't see this very gradual decline into a loss of clarity. You know, taking the edge off of yourself, a loss of energy, a loss of motivation.
That's right.
Before you get the next hit. And then eventually you end up in a totally different place than you started.
This is true of all psychoactive substances, but I think it's more subtle and invasive with marijuana than with most. And I call it medication spellbinding.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I have a chapter in Psychiatric Drug Withdrawal about medication spellbinding. And the technical name that I use for it in publishing scientific papers is intoxication anosognosia.
Okay, medication spellbinding is probably what our audience will remember
Well,
more of it, but I understand you have.
But just to tell you where that word comes from, the intoxication's clear. When you're intoxicated, you become unable to know, that's anosognosia, you become neurologically unable to know the effects of the drug. And it's probably because any psychoactive substance is going to invade your frontal lobes. Once it gets past the blood-brain barrier, it's in there. It's a joyride for the drug. There aren't really internal barriers the way there is to the getting into the brain. And if it's only affecting one neurotransmitter system, that's going to affect eventually the whole brain, multiple neurotransmitter systems. And once you're doing that, your judgment's gone. And then there's a peculiar fact that I can't really explain, which is that the drugs really do this to a very striking degree, the psychoactive drugs that people tend to use. So there used to be all these things, and I still see them on TV or radio. Friends don't let drunk friends drive. But if you've ever tried to stop a drunk friend from driving,
Not easy.
it's not easy. It could even be dangerous to you because they're certain they can drive. They don't want to be told they can't drive. They're going to tell you they'll drive better than ever because they know they're impaired. They're going to be more careful. They have no idea.
We've seen that here. Unfortunately, over the years, we've had to terminate a couple of employees who were clearly impaired from drug use and had been very forthcoming. They knew. They told us, I smoke marijuana on the weekends, or, and so, but you could see over time the decline in judgment, the inability to get things done. This is a pretty busy place, so if you can only operate at 20% capacity, it doesn't take long for things to pile up. And in those cases, there was no telling these people that it seems like you are unable to function right now. I can't make you stop using drugs, but it would be advisable to at least take a look at it. They don't see it. They think they're fine. On the outside looking in, as a non-drug user, as you were saying before, it's clear that they're not fine, but they think they're fine.
Yeah, it's interesting, and even I'm thinking about children and how parents often don't see the effects over time of drugs on their kids until it's too late. There's a tendency to sort of believe in drugs. So if you have your child on Ritalin, you don't notice that he's lost his smile. They used to be the life of the breakfast table or the dinner table.
Which was the problem they were trying to get rid of, maybe.
Which is, well, it was a part of the problem, which was the child's wonderful energy level that the parents didn't know what to do with, didn't know how to encourage in better directions, and so on. And maybe grandma comes into one of the sessions and she'll remind mom and say, and little Joey, Joey, you had such a twinkle in your eye before these drugs. And then mom, pardon me, if mom's alert enough, she'll start to cry. And she'll say, oh my God, it's
I'm so
really
glad you
changed.
brought that up, because we're going to talk about ADHD in the next video clip.
Well, good.
Because I think that's a subject that has very related to this, which is the very, in the beginning, subtle effect of drugging somebody, whether they're 6 or 60, and what happens over time. And the changes are so gradual. I've always said, if you could invent a pill where somebody could see what it's like today, I'm taking no drugs, I'm mentally alert, I feel like coming to work, I'm having a great time, I have energy, etc. And then live inside the body of somebody who's been taking some psychoactive drug, whatever it is, because alcohol use will do the same thing if you're drinking it every night and the whole 9 yards. If you could take that pill and then you see how awful you feel and how impaired you are and you can't think and it's difficult to balance your checkbook, you would probably never do it. But it's that gradual, I call it the gradual descent into hell. And people do it with food. They eat terrible food and every day is a little tiny, tiny, tiny bit worse than it was the day before, and one day they wake up and they're overweight and sick and on 5 drugs. They do it with marijuana, they do it with alcohol, you do it with children and Ritalin and stimulant drugs. And one day you wake up in a totally different place, and had you had that night and day experience, you never would have let it happen. But it's so gradual to let it happen.
Yeah, I want to take a break from this and just talk a little bit about Pam, and because I know I've said this before, the effect you had on my life. but you may have no idea we're watching today. Pam got in touch with me because of my views on psychiatric drugs, and I was very leery about coming to your conference. I figured you'd be selling something to cure bipolar disorder, and you'd believe in ADHD, and you'd have a special,
Supplement.
supplement or other that would cure whatever. I didn't even know what a good nutritionist would sound like. I really didn't know. And it took me a year after the first time talking with Ginger about it and expressing some skepticism, and then my coming back, and then my starting to read your books, and then watching the films, and then Campbell's books and the China study. So finally, Pam and I talked about my going on the basic right way to eat. It's not a diet, it's eating right.
Mm-hmm.
And and so I started eating right. And then my wife, who was very skeptical because she had inflammatory bowel disease, notice the word had, inflammatory bowel disease, and had tried this and that, and nothing made it better, and some things made it worse, and she was really quite disabled by it, and her ability to move around, go places, have a consistent energy level, even though she miraculously excuse me, contributed to my life in every possible way. She was still struggling with these things. Well, within, I think, a month, I lost 20 pounds. I mean, it was something remarkable. And she found that very interesting because I needed to lose 20. In fact, I've lost now 38 pounds. And the second week, I got skeptical. I'm weak. I said, I need my animal protein. I'm weak. So my wife says to me, honey, she would have been such a great physician, and she operates in many ways like a medical consultant for me because she reads and thinks so much. So she said to me, let's try you see your blood pressure. See, I had high blood pressure. So we checked my blood pressure, and instead of running at about 145 systolic over 85, which I considered a triumph on the medication, I'm on the medication, it's running like 100 over 50.
You're on the verge of comatose.
And I'm on the verge of collapsing,
Mm-hmm.
especially at my age, because it's only a year and a half ago, April, a year ago plus. And so I did involve my physician, who happened to know about the China study, because he's in Ithaca, where Campbell is, and you heard about it. So he was 100%. The only thing he said is you got to take vitamin B if you're going to go totally vegan. That was his only thing. So it was good. And so I'm now off of that. Now at the same time, and I thought this is probably what I'd someday die of. I was 82. I knew what my illnesses were. I had asthma. And if I didn't treat it every day, especially in the fall, I'd gotten 4 years in a row, pneumonia or bronchitis. And I thought, well, at some point that's probably going to overwhelm me, part of my old age. And I remember talking to my allergist, I had a good allergist, and I started on this, and I said to him, I've heard that if you stop dairy, a lot of people get over their asthma. He looked at me and he said, yeah. Why didn't you tell me that before? A kind and very intelligent and decent human being. Maybe he just got tired of telling people, who knows, because it's awfully hard to get people to change. And I said, well, I'm taking antibiotics, God, a lot. And he said, well, let's look. He said, well, 4 or 5 times a year. He says, that's okay at your age. Well, it's been a year and a half, and I haven't had an antibiotic since I went on your instructions about how to eat right. I think we need to get rid of the term diet, eat right.
Yeah, diet is, it implies transience, that you're going to do something for a while, whereas you made a comment last night, which I loved, and I have to repeat here. You said that the 2 important things in life are to eat well and to have relationships.
Good food and good relationships.
Good food and good relationships, that was it. So it's really good food. It's just eating good food.
That's right, how to eat good food.
Yeah.
I think we need to change the language. I want to change it for myself and get totally away from the idea of doing something unusual.
Right.
What's unusual about eating vegetables? Even my mother knew that. And I think one of the reasons I'm healthy is that she had gastrointestinal issues, my mom, and didn't make a lot of fatty food.
Mm-hmm.
So that may have been a real blessing. blessing. We had neighbors, me.
Well, you know, we grew up, you're a little bit older than I am, but we grew up in an era
Am
where, just a tiny bit. I'm 62, 82, 62, so just a little bit older. But we grew up in an era where you didn't eat all this fast food and ice cream. So we got off to, our lives got
That's
off to a
right.
little bit better state. So we didn't start adulthood in such the impaired state that
Right.
many kids do today. And that this is another thing, kind of circling around back to what we were talking about. I'm sure, really sure, that smoking marijuana on a regular basis is not good for an optimally healthy person. But if you grew up eating bad food, and you have health issues when you're 17, 18 years old, and you're overweight, and you're taking medications, and now you start smoking marijuana recreationally, the
Yeah.
impact has to be even greater than it would have been 40 years ago.
Well, that's right, and it's just gonna take away your willpower to eat right.
Mhm.
Taking marijuana leads, I believe, to a kind of a relativistic look at things. It does something that takes away that sharpness of individuality.
And so does alcohol. If you
So does
but
all
all
of that,
psychoactive
all the
drugs.
psychoactive substances. They do it in different ways, but all the psychoactive substances do that. That's right.
Well, this was very enlightening, and there's so much more we could talk about. I mentioned to you that I had just read the National Academy of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine report on marijuana, on cannabis. They analyzed 24,000 studies, and I am going to teach a course on that next year. There's so much to talk about, but I think the place to start is just in a general sense, before you get in the weeds and talk about this disease and that disease, because really many people are just smoking this for recreation, or using it, or eating it, or all the different ways in
Yeah.
which you can get it. It's a recreational type of thing, and maybe that's the group to target first, to warn them about the fact that this is not probably a very good idea. If you really take into consideration how you want to live your life and what you want to become as you age, you know, because life is pretty fabulous to be enjoyed.
And parents, you really need to know that you have a moral responsibility to help your children grow up. And one of those responsibilities, I believe, is to do everything in your power to go against the grain of your children using any psychoactive substances.
Exactly. Thank you so much. All right, so as usual, feel free to pass this on to anybody who you think might enjoy it. Hit the subscribe button if you'd like to see more videos like this. And remember, every time we hit a benchmark, we do a drawing, we give away a $200 certificate for programs. So hit the subscribe button, tell other people to do it too. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll be back to you on Thursday with more news.